GVV is giving voice to values, and it's an innovative approach to values-driven leadership development. I created it about a dozen years ago for use in graduate business schools, but it's now being used all over the world, literally 7 continents, in businesses as well as business schools, and we're now expanding beyond that into engineering and healthcare and the military and the police. GVV is giving voice to values, and it's an innovative approach to values-driven leadership development. I created it about a dozen years ago for use in graduate business schools, but it's now being used all over the world, literally 7 continents, in businesses as well as business schools, and we're now expanding beyond that into engineering and healthcare and the military and the police and things of that nature. And the main idea behind giving voice to values is about focusing on asking and answering a different question than we usually do when we talk about ethics and values. Usually we ask, what's the right thing to do? That's a good question, but giving voice to values asks and tries to answer the question, once you know what's right, how could you get it done effectively? And we give learners and practitioners and managers the chance to literally pre-script and rehearse and coach each other and plan action strategies to act on their values effectively. So the main idea, it's based on research that suggests that when people encounter values conflicts, they don't usually sit down and make a pro and con list or think about what would Aristotle say. You know, typically what people do is they react automatically, emotionally, even unconsciously, and then they rationalize after the fact why that was the right thing to do or the only thing to do. And so the idea behind giving voice to values is to actually give people a chance to rewire that automatic connection. And so instead of asking you, what would you do in this situation, which triggers that automatic response, instead we ask, what if you were this person who's decided they think this is the right thing to do? How could they be effective? And so we bring the emotion down, the stress down, we enhance people's ability to be creative, and we give them the chance to literally think strategically and tactically about how to enact their values when the stress is lower, so that now when you encounter a situation like that, you have alternate automatic responses. You have other ideas about what's possible rather than the limited, emotional, fearful reaction that says, oh, I don't have a choice.
Corrupt.
Why people are corrupt? Well,
Yeah.
There's been a lot of research on that by many different people, not so much by me, but typically there are a number of reasons. There's a confluence of an opportunity, pressure, and the sense that you actually can get away with it, you know? And so all of those things come together. And it doesn't mean that everybody wants to act corruptly. Sometimes what you're reacting to is the pressure. You feel that if I don't do this, I'm going to lose my job, or I'm going to not be promoted, or people will think that I'm not a team player, all kinds of pressures. And then there's other people who are responding to the opportunity, who are thinking, oh, you know, I might be able to enhance my own material self-interest here. You know, different people react in different ways. And so when you're trying to address corruption, you need to think about different ways to address that. For some people, having the threat of rules or laws that might be enacted becomes the motivator. But for a lot of people, the idea is there a way for me to be effective in my career without having to give in when I experience these pressures? And those are the people that giving voice to values is about. Those people who perhaps don't really want to do this, but they don't think they have choices. It can depend on the circumstances. There are times when cheating is harder. It certainly is riskier. But, you know, when I've talked to people, when I've gone around the world and done a lot of work in contexts where there is a lot of cheating in the classrooms, sometimes students do it because they feel pressured by someone else. You know, their friend said, you know, I don't have time to study for this exam, or I don't have time to do this paper. Will you help me? And so sometimes it's actually people who feel pressured by someone else. Sometimes it's just because people feel like it's going to be easier. They even if it is harder, they believe it will be easier. One of the things that we found working with giving voice to values, when I've gone into organizations and shared this, I'll give you one example. There was a faculty member who, in his leadership course in the senior year, the last year of the program, he broke his students into groups, and he gave them examples of scenarios where they were being pressured to cheat in a paper or an exam. And then he told them to go and work together in teams and come up with, how could you tell the person who's pressuring you to cheat that you don't want to? How could you say it in a way that would be something you could actually imagine saying, even if it's a friend of yours? Say it in a way that you could build up the confidence to do that, and say it in a way that will be effective and maybe even help your friend. And so they gave them a chance to rehearse that and to use the giving voice to values approach. And then they asked them to videotape their responses. So they sort of acted them out and they videotaped them. And then everyone in the class got to see all of these examples. And so from the students' point of view, they were given the permission, they were actually given the assignment to think about, how would I say no? And what would I say? And then they got to see lots of different examples of ways to say no. And the idea there is that a lot of times you don't want to do this, but you don't necessarily, it's hard to say no to a friend, it's hard to say no to somebody that you feel a certain sense of obligation to. And so this gave them the chance to, in a safe space, come up with lots of strategies and approaches to do it. And so that's one way. Another approach that I've spoken with another organization about, they were trying to deal with cheating. And we talked about, lots of times in schools, if a student gets caught plagiarizing or cheating, they'll be suspended, or maybe they'll be punished in some way. And so we talked about creating an opportunity for these students to actually engage in giving voice to values style exercises as part of their rehabilitation, as part of their training, as part of, the response to the cheating. If it wasn't bad enough to suspend them, this could be the first step. And they give them a chance to learn a better way to respond and to begin to practice it. And so some schools have thought about it that way. So there's lots of different ways to think about trying to address that issue. But I think it's important to understand that sometimes students just don't know how to say no. I think that there's lots of reasons why people stop paying attention to it. Sometimes it's because the people who are engaging in various forms of corruption are very powerful and people just don't feel like they have any choice. Sometimes it's just people are overwhelmed. People have their own lives and they're busy. There's lots of reasons why people stop paying attention to it. And I think our immediate reaction is to create rules and laws and punishment. And of course, that's necessary. But the thing is that that's never going to catch everything. It's too hard to catch everything. And that doesn't necessarily change the behaviors for the reasons that you pointed out, Luis Fernando, that people believe they're going to get away with it. They believe it will be easier. And so part of what we want to do is actually create a different habit, create a different pattern of behavior, and help people be more comfortable so that you don't have to rely entirely on external rules and laws and punishment. That's needed, but it's not enough. And so you really want to give people the confidence and the comfort and the skill to be able to resist this themselves. And then that becomes contagious.